Well, as I said earlier, welcome to the 23rd Sunday in Ordinary Time, and also the feast day of St. Pope Gregory the Great. There's a saying that's given to St. Gregory, and kind of just proposing what he said in this saying. There are people who come to God and they are elated at the time, happy and joyful. First stage of their coming to know the Lord. And then there comes a time of contemplation and meditation where they're just kind of complacent in their faith and they just kind of go along with their faith. And then he says in the third phase, they come to realize that they must search and meditate and look into their faith to really be able to come to know the God that they are seeking. That's kind of paraphrasing what he said, but that's what he meant. St. Gregory the Great. You know, in the first opening verse of wisdom this morning that Malia proclaimed to us, it says, "Who can know the mind of God? Who can know the counsel of God?" And that really opens up the readings today that we have just heard proclaimed, especially the gospel reading. If you do not hate your mother and father, sister and brother, wife and children, if you do not hate your own life, you are not worthy of me. That is a phrase, that is part of verses in the gospel that, to be honest with you, drive a lot of people away. It drives them away because they think, how can I adore and come to know a God who calls me to hate, who calls me to hate my mother and father, hate my children, hate my own life? I can't follow a God like that. We are getting to the point in our society where, I forget what the numbers are, 25% and greater who have left the Catholic Church, who have left other churches because of the same thing. Because they can't make sense out of some of the verses that come out of the Gospels and come out of the Bible. And they just don't take the time to understand. The misunderstanding of what Jesus Christ is talking about, the misunderstanding of what God is calling us to, leaves people just out there on their own. And then they kind of wonder, why am I lost? Why can't I make sense out of this? Because we're trying to do it on our own. We're trying to do it by our own thoughts, our own strength, our own determination in what Jesus is calling us to do. That phrase, hate your brother and sister, hate your mother and father, you know, we can take that back, and in the Catholic Church, we're a little bit different than many of the other communions that are around us, in that we preach that we take all of Scripture, from the first chapter of Genesis all the way through all of the books and the verses and the chapters in Scripture. If we don't do that, then we really don't come to understand what Jesus is talking about, what the evangelists are trying to open our minds to. And this is one of those readings. The same thing as the man who begins to build a tower, you know, and he can't complete it. Well, you may think of it as bricks and mortar, but let's think of it a different way. A person who wants to turn to God, but has a problem and can't commit themselves. They come to these type of readings and they just can't commit to continue going further, and they can't build on that relationship. That's what that tower is all about. There's many other ways to take that, but that's one of the simplest ways to understand what he is saying. You know, and on this it says great crowds were following Jesus. He wasn't just talking to his apostles. He wasn't just telling them what they have to do. He was speaking to all of the people following him. He is speaking to us today. If you do not hate your brother and sister, mother and father, your very life, you are not worthy to be my disciple. So how do we justify those words in our life? Well, as I said, when we take all of the Scriptures that in knowing all the scriptures, what they say. We go back to Genesis. We go back to Moses. When Moses was walking up to the burning bush, and then God gave him the 10 suggestions. No, actually, they weren't suggestions. He gave them the 10 ideals of how to live. Well, actually, no, he didn't give them ideals either. 10 commandments. He gave Moses the 10 commandments. And if we think about the words that Jesus is speaking to us today, and go back to the first commandment, I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt not have false gods before me. What was Jesus talking about? Anything in your life that takes priority before Jesus Christ is an idol. It is idolatry. That's what he's telling the people. You know, he's not saying, in fact, he said earlier in the scriptures, he said, love your brothers and sisters as you love yourself. He said, I have come to fulfill the law, not to abandon the law. So that's where people get really confused and mixed up. Well, how do I relate loving my brothers and sisters, fulfilling the law, and hating my brothers and sisters? Well, it takes some thought, and it takes some meditation, and it takes some listening, and it takes some searching, and it takes some reading, which nowadays probably everywhere throughout all of salvation history, it takes some effort that maybe a lot of times we're not willing to put out there. And then where St. Gregory was talking about, we get to a point in that third stage where we kind of lose sight of what God is calling us to. So what is God saying? What is Jesus saying? He's saying, live that I am the first priority in your life. I am the one you are seeking. I am the one who comes first before all things in your life. Now, that's another thing when you take it and you say, well, how can I take care of my family? How can I love my family, love my wife? But Jesus comes first. Well, it's kind of like I tell people when we're talking about marriage preparation. People are talking about getting married. And I say, you know, you'll hear in society, and many people will tell you that, well, marriage is 50-50. You get 50%, she or he gets 50%, and then that's a good match, that works. Well, I'll tell you from experience and from knowing a lot of people's relationships, that doesn't work. What does work is what Jesus is asking. 100%. You give 100%, and your spouse gives 100%. And what happens? You get everything that you want, everything that you need, and everything that you wish for. And the other person gets the same. And that's what Jesus is saying. Give me 100%, and everything else will fall in line. All the love, all the support, all the obligations, everything in your life will fall into line. How many believe that? I can't even give you a number. I wish I could say all Catholics believe that. I can't tell you that. Studies have proved that wrong. But can you believe that? Yes. If you take the time to listen, take the time to open your hearts and minds and say, yes, Lord, I want to follow the road and the path you lead before me. I want to love you as the first priority in my life, and then listen and learn. Will we all become perfect? No. I'm not perfect. I'll be the first one to admit that to you. Probably Bishop Nestout would say he's not perfect. We very, very few, I would think, if any, in our human life, reach the point of perfection that Jesus is actually calling us to, and the holiness that he's asking us to come to. But he's not saying if you don't reach this pinnacle of perfection, then you are not worthy. That's not what he says. Some preach that way, but that is not proper and that is not right. What he is saying is strive for the right road. Strive for the narrow gate. And then you come to that point of perfection that he is calling you to. Not everybody else, not your friend, sometimes not even your spouse, but what he is calling you to. Okay? Hate your father and mother, your brother and sister. Hate your own life. And then we become to understand what he is saying. Then we come to the point of being able to strive to be the disciple of Christ that he's calling us to be.